All right, guys, today we're going to read chapters 24 and 25. When we left off, Lily had gotten another letter from her dad, and he kept mentioning some books in there, and we're kind of starting to think that maybe it's some sort of a code. And then she also had to row the boat out into the bay and save Albert because he had gone out there thinking that he could get to a ship and swim to it. Chapter 24. They went into the kitchen, the three of them, Graham sliding the tea kettle onto the stove as soon as they were in the door. "Change your clothes, Lily," she said, "and find something of your father's that Albert can wear." And 20 minutes later, they were huddled around the table, hair damp but wearing dry clothes with Graham's knitted afghans around their shoulders. "It was my fault," Lily said slowly. "I told him we could get a ship to Europe, and he was trying—" "Oh, Lily," Graham said. Albert's eyes were on her. "I never really thought we could go. It was a dream like thinking someone will find Ruth." He sighed. "I just wanted to see the ships one more time. I wanted to think about the ships going to Ruth." Lily nodded, thinking that she had dreamed the exact same thing, going to Poppy, finding him. "When I started, it was not even raining. I just rose so slowly," he said. "I would not have gone without you." He shook his head. "And now I have lost the boat." "And we might have lost you both." Graham scraped back her chair. "Don't you know that this is what it's all about? Najimama sending you and Ruth away from her so you'd be safe, and your parents publishing a newspaper helping to win the war so you'd have a good life? For me? My mother and father?" Albert was nodding. "I have never thought about that. I have just never thought—" Graham turned to Lily. "And Poppy, who could have stayed right here? He went for you, Lily, and I had to let him go. My son." She turned her head a little. "It was so hard." Graham didn't say anything else for a moment. She looked like herself, stern, frowning a little. But then she put her hand on Lily's cheek. "But worth it. Worth the price to keep you safe." Before Lily could say anything, Graham pushed back the flowered curtains and went into her bedroom. "I have something for you, Albert." She came back carrying a blue case. "From the window," Lily said, realizing. "From the As Good as New shop." Graham smiled. "I'll have to swap fish every week for this violin for the next 2 summers." And Albert was reaching for the violin, running his hands over the case and then snapping it open to look at the shiny wood to pluck the strings. "I know about Najimama," Graham said. "I know she'd want this for you." But by this time the violin was under Albert's chin. For a moment he tightened the strings, his head turned to one side. Then the kitchen was filled with the sound of a Hungarian song, sharp, fast, and beautiful. And Graham was nodding. "See, Lily," she said, "if you'd only practice—" And at that moment Lily remembered Poppy's letter. "Give Graham a hug. She loves you more than you know." She sat back, glad Graham was there in the kitchen instead of far away like Najimama. She listened to Albert playing, his head bent over the violin, his fingers moving on the strings as the sound of the rain grew less and then stopped altogether, and in the window she could see a pale late sun edge the horizon. This waltz," Albert said, "is Najimama's favorite." But before he had played more than 2 or 3 notes, Lily remembered something else. "Good grief," she said, "my library book." "The book in the rowboat?" Albert asked. "It must be soaking wet." "Come on, Albert," she said. "We have to get it out of there, dry it off, something. And we have to look for paprika." They left Graham with her tea, and as Lily went out the door, she turned back to see Albert leaning over Graham at the table, kissing her cheek. "Zveretlek," he said. Then Lily was down in the boat with 4 inches of water in the bottom, handing it up to him. "Mrs. Haley will have a fit," she said. "She said it was a lovely book." Albert looked at it, water dripping from the edges, the dye running. "I know this book," he said. "I've read it in school. It's about the French Revolution, 1,000,000 years ago." Lily raised her hand. "Albert," she said. She sank down on the wet seat, her feet sloshing in the water. "Oh, Albert, I know where my father is. The French Revolution." She looked up. "He's been trying to tell me all these weeks. Madeline and the 3 Musketeers and Roland the French hero, all in France. That's why he sent me to Mrs. Haley. He knew she'd tell me there wasn't a book called The Promise." Albert was frowning. He didn't know what she was talking about. "His promise, Albert. That's what he meant. He promised I'd know where he was, that he'd tell me without the censors knowing. It took me all this time." And she began to smile, because Albert looked so silly standing on the dock with Graham's pink afghan over his shoulders and the dripping book in one hand, and because she knew where Poppy was. And then she remembered the war news and all the men who were being killed as the army tried to fight its way across France. Let Poppy be all right, she thought. Okay, this is chapter 25. Lily counted the days on her fingers. It was almost time for St. Albans, almost time for the 6th grade and Sister Benedicta. It was almost time to say goodbye to Albert. They had sent the letter to Poppy 2 weeks ago, she and Albert, both of them writing together, trying not to blot the tissue-thin paper. Albert had showed her the creased scrap of cardboard with spidery black writing before he copied it carefully. Ruth Orban, Maison Merfil de la Sagesse, Rue de la Santé, Paris. We can't count on it, Lily had told him. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Poppy's not in France. Yes, he said, I know. She didn't mean it, though. She knew Poppy was there. She was sure of it. And she kept remembering what he had said in the rowboat. Right behind the armies will be people like me. We're the ones who will help put Europe back together again. Find Ruth. For the first time, Lily paid attention to the war. Mrs. Haley lent them a huge map of France. They hung it in Graham's kitchen and tried to guess how long it would take the Allies to get from Cherbourg to Caen to Rouen and at last to Paris. And as Lily moved her finger slowly from one city to another, she could almost feel Poppy there. In the meantime, they swam and fished. Albert caught a skate and a sea robin and put them gently back into the water. Lily caught a fluke once and, for the first time, a flounder. And then on Tuesday, they had an argument. They didn't speak to each other for 3 days, and all because of the new movie at the Cross Bay Theater. I am not climbing those stairs, Albert had said. I am paying money, and I am walking in through the front door. I am not a thief. I don't have money, Lily had said. I will lend. No. I will give. No. She didn't know why he was so stubborn, why she was so angry with him. She spent 2 afternoons in the rowboat by herself before he appeared again at the dock. I have come to swim, he said at last. So swim, she said. You don't need me. But she was pulling the rowboat in, ready to put on her bathing suit and go with him. I am not a thief either, she told him. He raised his eyebrows. They started along Cross Bay Boulevard, waving to Mrs. Sherman, who was sweeping her walk across the street. Well, all right, Lily spoke as if Albert had said something. I'll pay. I'll save my money this winter, and next summer. She bit her lip and glanced at him. She knew he'd be thinking the same thing. Would he come back next summer? Would he ever come back? I know why you were angry, he said. When people go away. She nodded. Yeah. They had just passed the As Good as New shop when the door banged open in back of them. Mrs. Sherman, called Mr. Rowley. The radio. Turn it on. The news. Paris is free. Across the street, Mrs. Sherman flung out her arms. Free? Her face turned up to the sky. That beautiful city. They're going to keep going right now, said Mr. Rowley. Those soldiers of ours, right on to Germany. Lily stopped walking. Next to her, Albert had stopped too. Free, she whispered. The mailman rounded the corner. Have you heard the news? He called. It's the beginning of the end. Next summer we'll have lights on the boardwalk and the guys will be home. Lily grabbed Albert's arm. You'll be able to write to Ruth. The Nazis will be gone and Poppy will go to her. Ruth, Albert was saying at the same time, Ruth is there. I wonder what she is doing now at this moment. 2 days later, they could guess. Albert treated Lily to the movies and to a bag of popcorn, and they watched The Eyes and Ears of the World 4 times. They saw pictures of the great cathedral of Notre Dame and heard the story of the little plane that had flown just above its dome on Thursday. It had dropped the message, Tomorrow we come. Next to her, Lily could see Albert clutching the arms of the chair. His face was turned away from her, and he knew she was crying. She cried too, but they weren't the only ones. She could hear the sounds of crying all through the theater. They watched the main street of Paris, the Champs-Élysées, filled with 2 million people, old women with white hair, men with flags, children, and nuns. Young women were throwing kisses at the American soldiers who were riding on tanks covered with flowers. In one huge voice, the French were shouting, Merci, merci. Albert whispered it, Cousin, and Lily too. Thank you. Then the tricolor, France's flag, went up on the cathedral and people began to sing the French anthem, the Marseillaise. Lily and Albert leaned forward, staring at the faces surrounding the cathedral, looking for Ruth, looking for Poppy. Lily could almost picture them there together. At last they stood up blinking and went through the lobby. Of course, we could not see them, Albert said. So many people. Of course not, Lily said, but we know they were there, and someday we'll ask. Albert was smiling at her, nodding. And they will tell us. They headed back toward Lily's. By this time, it was almost dark. They had been in the movie for hours. Overhead, the first star was just visible. She looked up at the sky. Only a few days were left of summer. And then she thought of the stars on the porch wall in back of her bed. Her mother's stars. She'd peel one off for him. He could paste it on the little cardboard with Ruth's address. Yes, she thought, she'd give it to him before they left.